everyone, a long time no see. Today we're going to be looking at Ravel's noble and sentimental waltzes, specifically the fifth one. Quick disclaimer, this stuff is pretty advanced and is not geared toward beginners. With that said, let's take a listen to the first few bars and dive right in. So I don't know about you, but when I first listened to this while looking at the score, I thought, okay, what the hell is going on harmonically here? I mean, let's just look at all the notes involved in beat 2 of the first bar. From the bottom up, we have an A, C, D, E sharp, and G sharp. Now, yes, we all know Ravel uses lots of extensions, but this looks more like a cluster than some sort of extended harmony. So what's really going on here? To figure that out, we're going to start by focusing on the harmonic accompaniment. Let's forget about the melodic line on top and just look at the accompanying harmonies. The first thing to notice is the constant presence of the C and D in all three bars. Repeated notes like this often point to either a pedal, anticipation, or prolongation of some sort of harmony. With that in mind, let's now look at the lower part. We have A, F sharp, and D. If we put the two together, we get from the bottom up, D, F sharp, A, C, and D. In other words, what looks to be a D dominant chord. However, just because this spells out a dominant chord does not mean it is functioning as a dominant chord. This is extremely important to understand. Chord function is not determined by chord quality, it is determined by harmonic movement. In a blues, for example, you can have dominant chords functioning as tonics, subdominants, and dominants. So if we want to understand what's going on harmonically here, we need to look at where this so-called dominant chord is going, its movement. The two upper voices, C and D, both move a half step up to C sharp and D sharp. Half-step resolutions like this scream unprepared lower neighbor to me, but let's keep going. Then we have what looks to be a D going to a B and an F sharp going to an A. If we were to summarize this whole movement, we'd have what looks like a D dominant going to a B dominant ninth. But again, this so-called D dominant is not resolving to a G chord. It is not functioning as a dominant. It's actually functioning as an incomplete lower neighboring chord to the B dominant ninth. That D in the lower part is supposed to resolve to a D sharp, just like it did above, but Ravel avoids this because it would create too dense a voicing over the B dominant ninth chord. Due to this, I hear the B as a new voice and not as a continuation of the D natural. The F sharp and the A are just anticipations of the B dominant ninth, with the F sharp omitted over the B dominant to keep the voicing on the lighter side. Okay, so what does this actually mean, and what are the implications of this when it comes to hearing and integrating this passage? Well, let's go back to a typical D dominant chord. A D dominant chord that truly functions as a dominant exists within the tonality of G major. So if we were to analyze the scale degrees of a D dominant chord within the context of G major, we'd get from the bottom up scale degrees 5, 7, 2, 4, and 5. Again, this would be the case if we were in G major and this D dominant were to resolve to a G major chord. However, we are not in G major. We are in E major, and this chord is resolving to a B dominant chord. Thus, we must analyze these notes within the context of E major. With that in mind, we have scale degrees flat 7 or sharp 6, if you want to think about it that way, 2, 4, flat 6, and flat 7. This is how we can come to understand this passage orally. So you really have to feel those lower neighboring tones pulling upward toward the chord tones of that B dominant chord, resolving to degrees within the E major scale. And that's what makes this passage so genius and difficult. Ravel is using what appears to be a very familiar harmony, but putting it in a context that completely transforms its function, its identity. That's what gives this passage such an ethereal and mysterious quality. Now I'll replay the reduction of the lower neighbor chord going to the B dominant ninth chord. Upon listening, try and really hone in on that lower neighbor feeling. Hone in on those upward half-step resolutions. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to play the actual passage as written by Ravel. And when I do, try and hear the harmonic reduction on top of the passage. This means you'll have to hold the lower neighboring chord in your mind for 3 bars before it resolves. And just a heads up, this is not easy to do. We're so used to having embellishments last a very short amount of time, but here Ravel prolongs the lower neighbor for 3 bars. I'd even recommend playing along with the reduction harmonies if you have access to a piano. With that said, let's take a listen to the original. I hope you can hear or begin to get an idea of what I'm talking about, because this is pretty much the basis of Ravel's chromaticism and harmonic language. Often his most bizarre chords are built off of non-harmonic tones that either get resolved or not. Anyways, now that we have a good understanding of what's going on harmonically, let's move on to the melody. What stands out in the melody is this constant G sharp. It even remains once we arrive at the B dominant. This G sharp is a pedal that becomes the 13th over the B dominant chord. And remember, in this style, 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths can function as real chord tones and not only as non-harmonic tones. The A is functioning melodically as an incomplete upper neighbor, but we know that it is also the 7th of the chord of resolution, B dominant 13th. And finally, we have this E sharp. This E sharp may seem very out of place, but it follows the same logic we saw with the accompaniment. It too is an incomplete lower neighbor. However, it does not resolve. Normally, we'd expect the E sharp to resolve to F sharp, the 5th of the B dominant chord, but Ravel avoids this because it would clash with the G sharp. It's important to keep in mind that Ravel doesn't always resolve his non-harmonic tones. If we were to create a new harmonic reduction that took the melody into account, we could end up with something like this. Let's summarize what we looked at today. At first glance, this chord here may look like a dominant with a sharp 9, but it is in fact an incomplete lower neighbor to B dominant 13. The D, C, and E sharp are all incomplete lower neighbors that resolve up a half step to D sharp, C sharp, and F sharp of the B dominant chord. F sharp, A, and G sharp are all anticipations of the B dominant chord. The F sharp is omitted from the B dominant to avoid muddiness. Let's listen to this reduction. And now let's listen to the passage one more time. And just like last time, try and map that reduction onto the actual passage. So here we go. All right, so that is it for today. There's of course a lot more to cover, but we'll continue our analysis in another video. Thanks for tuning in and see you all next time.